plus an oxidant equals fire. We can take this page from the chemistry books to apply to our daily walk. Whenever a fuel and an oxidant get together, fire has to result. That means whenever you separate yourself from the mainstream, the oxidant, and God begins to elevate you, the fuel is going to get hot. Is there a witness that will testify that an elevation in your spirituality will lead to an elevation in temperature? This is what we find Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the 3rd chapter of Daniel. These Jews living under the rule of Nebuchadnezzar had been placed in charge of the province of Babylon. In other words, these 3 Hebrew boys had been elevated. You know the story. Having refused the decree of the king to fall down and worship the idols, at the sound of the appointed music, these friends of Daniel faced the common punishment of the day, the fiery furnace. Because of the predicament they found themselves in, the trial by fire was inevitable. And so as we have assembled ourselves in God's presence today, there may be those among us who have come to the point where the temperature in their situations is rising. Bills may be piling up. Family issues may be presenting themselves. Children won't do right. Spouse won't do right. Church won't do right. In other words, because God has elevated you and you have been obedient to His will in your life, you have found yourself dead in the middle of the fire. In my spiritual mind, I can see that somebody is starting to feel uncomfortable. Somebody's circumstance is causing him to start sweating. Somebody is pulling at his collar because he is in the fire. But how many of you know that God has not abandoned you even in this hour of trial? How many of you know that no matter how hot it gets, you still have a friend who is controlling the purpose? How many of you know that there's a friend in the fire? In the text,
that's what I'm talking about.
Hebrew boys displayed a definite defiance in the face of the king. In verse 17, after the punishment had been handed down, they responded to the king, "If it be so, our God who we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fire of furnace, and He will deliver us out of thine hand, O king." But then they got real bold in verse 18, and they said, "But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up." It is clear that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were cognizant of the fact that the fire was just a part of God's plan. They knew that though the enemy was responsible, he could only do what God would allow. They recognized from the onset, even though they were ready to die for what they believed in, this was just an opportunity for God to prove Himself. I don't know about anybody else, but I don't mind if God has to prove just who He is through me. The songwriter said, "I am conditioned to go through. I don't mind letting Him work in me." And so we find ourselves at the first life lesson to consider, and that is the devil will do that which disturbs you. What that means is that the person who is responsible for your fire knows just what will get on your nerves the most. The Punisher knows your pet peeve. Indeed, Nebuchadnezzar in his vast and far-reaching power could have mandated any punishment he wanted for the disobedient. But in verse 6, the decree is handed down that the punishment for this offense will be the fiery furnace, a punishment entailing intense pain, distress, and anguish. People of God, do you realize that the enemy studies your life? Do you realize that he knows what you like and don't like? That he knows your weaknesses and your temptations. That's why when somebody doesn't come through for you or things don't go your way, it's always the one thing that the devil knows good and well will get on your last nerve. But astonishing that the devil himself pays that much attention to you? People of God, that simply means you're important. That simply means that the enemy recognizes that you're walking in a destiny so great that you can't even comprehend it. I guess that means the devil himself realizes that I'm of a peculiar people, a royal priesthood with an inheritance ordained by God, and he's going to try his best to block it. But how many of you will be a witness that what God has ordained, he will maintain? There is no fire hot enough, no tribulation tough enough, no trial strong enough to separate me from the love of the God I serve. Because in verse 25, the Son of God is in the fire with me. It just won't prosper. The second lesson we need to be mindful of is that your confinement will lead to your assignment. We as Christians must realize that sometimes God has to box us in. Put a little fire up under us to get us to recognize that he's trying to work in our lives. With your spiritual mind, I want you to imagine this furnace of the ancient Babylonian kingdom. Some historians believe that it may have been a pottery oven repurposed for executions. More importantly, though, in this furnace, there is only one way in and one way out. Amen. In other words, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were trapped in. Somebody might feel trapped in tonight. Trapped in by circumstance. Trapped in by surroundings. Trapped in because of who you are. But let me encourage you. Sometimes he has to back us up against the wall just to see what we're made of. And to remind us of who he is. Just look all through the Bible. When David hid in the cave fleeing King Saul, that was confinement. But when David was promoted, that was assignment. When Jonah was in the belly of the whale, that was confinement. But when Jonah became an effective servant in Nineveh, that was assignment. And then look at Jesus. He went down for 3 long days. And he got up and walked the earth for a serious 40 days. And he got up out of here. Why? Because he had to complete his assignment. His assignment was preceded by his confinement. So when God gets ready to box you in, just begin to praise him. Because God is saying, I have a work to perform in you. God is saying, don't give up, hold out until